everyone, and welcome to the first Scots Whay Hae and Into Creative conversation, a collaboration between Scots Whay Hae and Into Creative. And for this conversation, I'm joined by writer David Cameron. We're going to talk about his novel Femca, but so much more. So first of all, hello David.
Hello Ali, thanks for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure. So before we dig deep into Femca, can you give us some background to your life as a writer? How did you get to this point?
Sure. Well, I grew up in East Kilbride. I suppose I was a reader when I was young, but writing, it came, I think, probably at the age of 12, and that was a poem that came to me like fully formed into my head.
Right.
And up until that point, I think I was about as suspicious of poetry as most people, continue to be anymore. But certainly from 12, 13, 14, 15. I was writing poetry, and I continued writing poetry, went to Aberdeen University, and I think I lost it a wee bit, when you get into university, it's sort of, I was still trying, and I was consciously trying, and I got a wee bit too clever, and then I actually went back to, was working before, so from that moment on I thought, I'm not going to try and write a poem, so if they come, they come, and that's basically been my guiding principle in poetry.
Yeah.
Now, I got infatuated in my teens with the writer Robert Graves.
Right.
And he talked about, described his novels as the dogs you breed to pay for the cats.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, if I'm going to maybe one day make a living from this, which I haven't managed to do yet, but I'll see if I can write fiction as well. So I think about 97, so when I was just about 30, 31, I started to write. It was kind of autobiographical stuff, so I didn't really think it was the first thing I was going to get published, so there was a lot of things about family, and it was sort of 3/4 autobiographical, quarter fiction, and to my surprise, when I sent that off to publisher, like a few chaps was going, yeah, I really like this, so that was my first book. Russo Moon came out in 2000, and then there was a 14-year hiatus. I went off to Amsterdam, got married, and just with work and everything, I just didn't have the time to devote to fiction, but I was still writing poetry.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so 2014, before my next novel or novella came out, Ghost of Alice Fields.
Mm-hmm.
But in the past, I think 5 years, there's been about 5 books, so it's certainly accelerating. And so there's a couple of books of poetry. Femca has come out. I wrote a book about Samuel Beckett. And here I am now.
It's an interesting idea that when you went to university, you were almost consciously trying to be a poet rather than just letting the poetry come. And I think artists, sometimes that's similar, they go to art school and they can really paint and they can really good, but often that gets almost trained out of them, or at least, I've spoken to people that's the case. Was that, you were almost consuming all this literature and wanting to copy it in some way, or thinking, was the idea of what a poet was not who you thought you were at the time?
Well, it wasn't even so much becoming academic, because to be honest, I got kicked out of the English department at one point, and I finished my degree doing social anthropology, just like Ted Hughes, because I wasn't really interested in following what they wanted me to read. So I was just following my own interests. So in that sense, I wasn't academic. I think it's a spiritual thing as well with poetry, and I think it'll come when you're living, right? And it just felt like maybe I was off at that point, and I hadn't, was kind of trying to find myself a wee bit, and found myself a bit more later on, and it came back to me. I suppose I was a bit more self-conscious about it because I joined a creative writing group.
Yeah.
My first year was Ali Smith's last year.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess I was thinking a bit more about what I was doing, and also that thing of I want to have a poem to be discussed on Thursday when we all meet up, and so a bit of pressure to write.
Because I saw you a reading at Gillian Sheriff's book launch the other night, and I think you mentioned that the poems come to you in the car, in the shower, and you know that's the way that they work. They almost just appear. Is that right?
Yeah, I do have, and my wife remember telling me that she loved these notebooks where I was writing the poems, and the handwriting was really tiny for some reason. You know, I can't read them now, and so I did that for a long time. But now I very rarely write down. Even then, it would be involuntary in origin, so the first few lines, and I didn't want to start writing it down too soon. But what I found was that even the act of writing after, say, a verse, the poem could go off.
Right.
You know. I don't know if it's like engages the intellect more, but so yeah. Now then I found, and that wasn't something that I chose. I would be driving. I found in the commute to Belfast. I'm living outside Belfast now. Often that poem would come like in the morning or in the shower, or going out for a walk. And I know some poets, some writers will carry a notebook around with them, so but I didn't. And then the good thing about that was that if I forgot anything, then it meant it wasn't memorable.
Yes.
Obviously, there's only so much, maybe a dozen or so lines I can carry about in my head before I'll start writing down. But it's worked for me so far, so I'm just sticking with it.
But I guess it's such a different approach to writing a novel like Femke. How do you start that? How do you do you have that initial idea that maybe has come to you and then begin, or?
Yeah, it's a different process, and you do have, people like to ask about the discipline of being a writer. When you get up every morning and I don't do that. But when I'm writing a novel, it usually starts, I'll maybe write a chapter, an idea will come to me, 1 or 2 or 3 chapters, and I'll leave it, and then I'll pick it up at some point when it's really kind of grabbing at my throat. And I guess in that period of time there's a lot of unconscious work going on, but once I get actually into the rhythm of it, then I do need to write every day, even if it's like with The Ghost of Alice Fields, that one. So my second son had just been born, and it would be about 10:30 at night when he was down. I knew he'd be down for a few hours. I would start, so I would write between 10:30 and about midnight every day. And that novel has a kind of dark feeling for me now because it was that time of night.
That idea that people, there's this compulsion to write, I think that's something that people who don't write find hard to understand, but I've spoken to enough writers to know that really is the case. Something's in their head and they just have, and it can be writers of music as well as books, and there's just that compulsion to get it out the head almost. Yeah.
Well, I think poems are so short so that you are dealing with really unconscious material that is erupting into consciousness. But the thing is, you don't get to elaborate too much,
Yeah.
And I think so. What I do in my fiction is really pick at themes that the poems are suggesting to me and elaborating on them.
Well, I think that's a good thing to tell us more about Femke and just give a brief synopsis of what it is.
I was just about to cross the road to go into the building, the office building, to teach, and this young woman was walking past, and she had a dog. She had a parka with her hood up. I only saw for about a split second as it was about across the road. Something about her appearance intrigued me, and it was kind of, I didn't know if it was appealing or she was ravaged by experience. It was a kind of a dark look, right? But just in that moment across the road, I almost felt like, I don't know, my soul passed into hers into mine.
Right.
That I thought, I want to live her life for today. I don't want to cross and be teaching English. So that's how it started. So I don't know if that sounds ridiculous or how insubstantial, because I didn't know anything about her.
Yeah.
So it's completely made up from imagining her life, but obviously it's all my preoccupations are coming to the fore.
I mean, that sounds like on another day it could almost have been the start of a poem about, but this felt more substantial and you wanted to kind of, go further. And you talk about the themes that you maybe want to look at further. And in the book, you've got desire and obsession, and why did you want to dig deeper into those things? Because sometimes they can be uncomfortable. Not in the book, I just mean in general when you reflect on those yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I like to go where it's uncomfortable, not to the extent that I'm kind of going to end up feeling deranged about something, but I want to, if I feel uncomfortable, I think, okay, this is the territory I should be operating in now. So I think what it was that I mentioned Robert Graves. Now, Robert Graves famously wrote a book called The White Goddess and had a theory about being inspired by the muse. And in his he had his second marriage, and then he, for the rest of his life, had these kind of a succession of younger women who were muses, right? And I always felt a bit uncomfortable with the idea. And I know it's become an old-fashioned idea of the muse, but I thought, well, I was interested in the psychology of the women, because I thought, well, what did they get out of it too? So there's a okay, we know there's a male projection onto the woman, right? But there's also a projection onto the man from the woman. So I thought that would be an interesting, psychologically, that was interesting. But also that the whole idea of is the poet-muse relationship, is it exploitative or is it sacred? So, and I think in Femke she's a muse to two different men, right? One is an English filmmaker who's married, kind of takes her up, and that looks exploitative, right? In the second half, she befriends an aging, well, he's not really that old, but he's older than his years. He's older than her, he's in his early 70s. And you don't know if that's like a father-daughter type of relationship or it is a poet-muse relationship, but she, I think that one is helps her in a way. There's something about that, and she then gets really infatuated by his relationship with a muse, because this guy's called Michiel de Koning, the poet, the Dutch poet, has written a sequence of sonnets. It's the last poems he ever wrote about this woman who he was in love with, and did she go mad or what happened? And she becomes a bit obsessed with, well, who is this woman? And tries to track her down, thinking that somehow finding out more about her would help restore Michiel, because he's become a bit neglected by the literary world, but also neglecting himself. So
there's, because she almost becomes obsessed with him as well, isn't it? It's not just people's obsession about Femke, but it's her search as well, and she becomes obsessed with the search for this muse, as you say. And the muse is one which is kind of a problematic idea. Was that part of going into the uncomfortable area, just even writing about the idea of the muse?
Yeah, I mean, I felt influenced by Graves, but I didn't really believe in his theories, but I was interested in him. I do think that the love relationship and the sexual relationship, these are like at the basis of the kind of poetry that I respond to. Probably more than Graves, I respond to Thomas Hardy, and his great sequence was to his wife Emma just after she died. So he wasn't a muse poet so much, but he was a great love poet. So I was interested in the idea of the poet-muse relationship, or artist-muse relationship. But I didn't want to just come at it from the point of view of, okay, it's discredited. I did want to see what was the actual psychology, because it does continue to happen. Of course.
And it does examine it, particularly in that early relationship where you can see that it is perhaps the stereotype of what people think about today when they think about a muse and an artist, if you can call him an artist. So it's interesting again that you kind of flip that on its head, particularly in the second part of the book. I was interested because I reread it before we came to talk.
God bless you.
And it struck me as being quite Greek. There's a lot about mothers and fathers kind of going on there. Is that something?
Yes. Yeah, well, maybe Freudian, I don't know, or Jungian, but I guess there's an Oedipus complex, a Electra complex floating about there. And that's the thing, is that the thing with I was saying the father, is it father-daughter poet-muse? And I suppose if you're taking like the orthodoxy of Freud, the relationship with the parent, like the son with the mother, the daughter with the father, is kind of a template of the relationships later in life. So yeah, it's exploring that. So sometimes, what could those younger women like Graves' muses, what could they? This must have been something of the father figure in him too, like the elderly poet. So all that's mixed into, and there's it turns out that Femke realises that Michiel de Koning did know her mother and aunt, and then she gets a bit of a fright. Hang on, how close were they? So yeah, it is investigating those feelings of separation from mother and father, but also the way that they shape our later relationships in life. Whether it's that we respond to something that is like a mother-father, or we're actually going to the opposite because we want, I don't want to be, with a woman who's like my mother, I don't want to be with a man who's like my father.
Yeah.
But it's still shaping.
That kind of pull between feelings and conventions, if you like, society says is acceptable and, often are against what people's passions are, for want of a better word. Do you reread your books? Once they're done?
Yes, and I reread. I did flick through last night actually without sort of rereading, so I didn't. It wasn't as studious as you were for this. Just to remind me, because even there was a launch there in April. Even since then, my mind is already moving on to new work. Just to remind me. I think with Femke. So actually, the first sentences were written when that was 2001, right? Then I wrote a few chapters. I dropped it, moved to Ireland, and took up. So probably about 10 years ago, the first draft was finished. So I have been revising. I've been so in a way I'm very familiar with the work through revision. I'm not a great reviser. excuse me, of my poetry, because if it's a strong impulse, usually it comes out right first time. But with Femke, certainly there was a lot of revision. But once it's published, I'm a bit afraid to reread because I'll spot a typo or something.
Oh right, fair enough. Yeah. I wondered if anything surprised you about when you finish a book. Are you ever surprised by your own writing? I guess because you said some of it's quite spontaneous, particularly the poetry.
Yeah. I'm always, and I think maybe that's why I'm not a natural born novelist. I'm more of a poet, and the thing about poetry is that it is about surprise. You're telling yourself something that you don't know. I think I've defined a poem as the sudden realization of something you've always known. So in that sense, it's a surprise and not a surprise. Yeah. So I guess some part of you knows it. So yeah, I am surprised, and Femke has so many strands, and we could discuss this. I don't know if you want to, but whether she's an unreliable narrator or not. So, and she tells slightly different stories. So even for me, I haven't got all this plotted out. It's developing as I'm writing. Yeah. But sometimes I go, oh yeah, that links with that links with that. Yeah. That's the true story. One time that happened with Femke, and I thought, I've cracked it. I know what it is. And then I forgot what it was.
That's why you should get your notebook out and write these things down.
I think I'd written the first 6 chapters, which are short chapters, and then left Amsterdam and moved to Ireland. And I actually dropped the book for a while thinking, I'm away from the city. This was set in that city. I'll probably, I'll have less and less, memory or detail. Mm-hmm. Maybe I shouldn't do it. And then I thought, Femke herself, she's not a tourist, and she's also, especially in the beginning, it's like a long soliloquy that she's really involved in her own inner life. So I thought, I'll bring in the details that I remember, or I can also Google some stuff if I forget. But I wasn't too worried. But I nearly had this agent who really loved it, but she was saying, really hype that up. We can really sell it as a novel of the city of Amsterdam. Right. People love that. And I thought, no, I wanted it to be more like the Prague and Kafka, where sort of it's more like the impression the city makes on your soul as opposed to, a map of the city.
Yeah, rather than it being exact, you
Yeah.
get a sense
Yeah.
of it. I was talking to a writer just recently about Glasgow and why it works so well in crime fiction in particular, and they were saying, you know, it's not about that place and here's where I visited and everything, and like a map, it's about capturing a kind of, it almost becomes a character in its own right, the city.
Yeah, I mean, there's something, I think it's even explicitly stated in one sentence in the book, that something about Femke being maybe emblematic of the city as a whole.
Why I asked the question was because it doesn't feel like I could go and walk the streets as you can sometimes do in some novels and think, well, I could go and have a coffee in that cafe or something like that. But there's a sense of the place as well, and maybe that comes through in the characters as much as anything else.
Well, I tell you something, Ali, after the launch, so that was in April, about a week or two later I went to Amsterdam.
Right.
I was meeting somebody there, and I went to the East, I went to the Oyster Park, I went to the places that I knew, and the interesting thing was that some things that I thought were fictional places and were actually there. I was like, that was the bench. That is the bench where she sits down. She meets Michiel de Koning.
Yeah,
it's there. It's an actual bench. So that was interesting. That the city had made more of an indelible impression in my mind than I had realised. Yeah.
Talk about Prendergast's Fall in a moment,
Okay.
which is very much partly about structure. You can see that there's two covers. There's a black division in the middle there. It's, well, how do you describe Prendergast's Fall to people?
Prendergast's Fall it's a very simple concept. It's the story of someone's life from death to birth, and it's a suicide, but because it's told backwards, it's like the moment, the impact, the moment of death is the moment of birth.
Right.
Okay. Now that is a really bleak concept for a book, but the thing is that if you're going backwards, you're going towards hope. You're going away from all the things that where life went wrong. So it becomes hopeful, and you get into childhood and infancy. You're still seeing maybe some of the reasons what caused the suicide, but you're going towards hope. I always, as I was writing it, I was thinking, well, do you know what? Because these are like short, they're almost like prose poems. I don't know if that struck you, but they're like mostly short paragraphs.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if you not reverse all the words, but you take, the last paragraph becomes the first paragraph, the second last becomes the second. You could tell this story the other way around. That was notional in my head, but with Into Books, the publisher, and my brother Stephen is behind that, and Stephen actually gave me the idea for the novel. I should say that, because he told me about having a kind of almost dream or vision, waking vision of someone falling through space and seeing like scenes from their life. Now it wasn't about suicide, but I added the suicide, but also the reverse order, which actually does happen in some near-death experiences, a minority.
Right.
It's like, your life flashes before your eyes. It does happen in reverse order sometimes. So I thought, well, Stephen was, he has this into creative, the art side, and he was interested in publishing, and he was interested in this book, and I thought, well, send it out to big publishers and see, the inevitable rejections, but you never know. But I thought, well, it was Stephen's idea, but also, what other publisher is actually going to double their costs by you can flip it over and go from the other order, and thought, well, that's great. And it was really interesting because then I did have to rearrange in paragraphs, and then I thought, well, I made a mistake there. I need to. It was easier if you're taking, let's say, a chapter, if it covers like a few days or a month or something, that's quite easy to reverse the order. But in some of them, if it's like a key moment in his life, in Prendergast's life, it might be one incident, like in a pub with somebody, and the whole comment. That's actually harder to do it in reverse. The other thing is doing it, I describe it as an anti-novel, because it's like when you think about a novel, like you introduce a character, the reader might sympathise with them, and it builds up over time. This is like you have a character, and then they disappear, inevitably they disappear, because until Prendergast meets them, then they're no longer there.
Yeah, I think if a description as an anti-novel might have put off some publishers. The right one.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. Originally, it was just going to be a tale told in one direction, for want of a better term. And
that's why. So if I can just show, that is so that is my preferred direction, which is Death to Birth. You can flip over. Unfortunately, you need a barcode in books, so that's a bit. But I suppose and I have found some. There's a friend of mine recently. She started to read it, and she read it the right way, if you like, and then she was struggling a wee bit and said, "Well, try it the other way," and she much preferred it that way. So the option is there for the reader.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, once you've read it one way, it's difficult to kind of start at the beginning, if you like, you know, and do that story. And it looks at kind of memory and regret again. Themes which can be difficult to examine. That's what you wanted to do, though. Looking back over life and seeing how things might have been. Yeah,
I mean, there's as it gets closer to childhood, I do bring in things that you just remember from childhood. Like let's say when you're at school and you have your monitors or prefects, and there's it's a hot summer's day. And everybody's lined up at the water spout, and it used to be in our school a prefect or a monitor there. It sounds like I went to a private school. I didn't. It was a comprehensive at East Kilbride. And they're all queuing up, and I remember being the sense of injustice that were saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you only got. But if it was someone they liked, they would count slowly, and I thought, if I become a monitor or prefect, I'm never going to do that. And then one day I found myself doing it. I went, oh, sure. That was, and I felt that shame, that guilt. So incidents like that I put in the book. So it's autobiographical in that sense. I bring a lot in. But I think it's about, in terms of my own life, it's more, so it is fictional. It's more like, well, what if I had made a different choice? Mm-hmm. For instance, in my day job, I'm a learning consultant. I work for a company that creates a lot of e-learning. So Martin Prendergast is the owner of an e-learning company. Mm-hmm. Now, what if I'd gone more the business route? And he had a talent, he had an artistic talent which he kind of buried to become a businessman. And that's not a choice I've made, but it's sort of if things had gone differently or wrong, I might. And I'm sure I have made wrong choices still, so examined those too. But in that sense, I was glad to be writing fiction, but I knew it was existentially, I suppose, close to my own life. It was decisions I had to make in my life.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That I think often the best novels are that kind of searching of the self, and and how things may have been differently, because that can be incredibly uncomfortable, that idea of this would have taken me down a different path, and who knows what might have happened. That choice, that kind of sliding doors moment.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly it, and I think Femke has that in a way too. Mm-hmm. It has a simpler structure. It's in 2 parts. Yeah, and the 2 parts can almost exist. They could be 2 separate novellas.
Yeah.
And actually, what I found difficult when I was trying to, when I'd written it or first draft, sending it out to agents and publishers, of all the books I've written, I think it was the most interest from agents and publishers. But it was always the case they would say, I love part 1, not so sure about part 2, or the other way around. Mm-hmm. And if it had been consistent, feedback about one of the parts being weaker than the other, I would have, changed it or rewritten. But if I know, that's interesting, and I just need to find a publisher that's going to like both parts equally. But I struggled with that, and then I saw it was Taproot Press were actually inviting submissions for novellas, and I had been sending out part 1, and I thought, okay, I'll send out part 2. So I went in, stripped any reference, any connection to part 1, sent that out, and Patrick Jameson of Taproot came back saying, I love this, I'd like to publish it, which was great. But then I thought, I've done this before where I actually get an opportunity and I scupper my chances. I say to him, there's actually another part to this, and it's bigger, would you like to read the whole? It's more like a novel rather than a novella. And he said, okay, go on, send it to me. And he was the publisher that did like both parts equally. So
That's interesting, because I was going to ask you when Taproot took it on, what Pat said why he took it on, what kind of grabbed him, but it was the initial part one, and then you went, well, actually.
No, it was the part two that I said.
Part two, right? Oh, okay.
So, yeah,
wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. I think it was, well
that's really interesting, because as a reader, I would never have thought that. It feels at one level.
Yeah.
Even though it's in two parts.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference there. The main difference, I think, between the two parts is that, especially at the beginning, is that, as I said, it's like a long soliloquy. There's not other characters, or they're not speaking, because at that moment in her life, Femke is really on her own, apart from with her dog. And then when she says in one sentence, "I'm talking to my dog," you think, is this actually a narration in her head or out loud to her dog? Because that's really the only person, the only creature in her life. But then as she meets Alistair, the filmmaker, and his wife Susan, then you get dialogue is coming in. But in the second half, there's much more dialogue, there's more communication with people, but that's her development, that's her personal and spiritual development is happening before our eyes.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a bit about your poetry. I think that would be quite good to do. You won the Hennessy Literary Award in 2014. I'm interested in literary awards at the moment, because I've been talking to McIlvany Prize winners for Bloody Scotland and the Debut Prize, and just what they mean in practice. I mean, what does winning such an award do? Is it, I guess it's positive, but practically, what does it do for you?
Well, it's an interesting one, because I won an award that I didn't enter. I didn't think I was entering for an award,
right.
But basically I don't know in Scotland if how many people know about the Hennessy, but in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, it's a big thing in the sense that a lot of the major writers have won the Hennessy.
Yeah, and it's writers across styles and genres.
Yeah. And my friend, the late writer friend Dermot Healy, he won it twice. I'm not sure, maybe for fiction and poetry or something, but that's very unusual. No, it was that I think it now might be the Irish Times, but at the time it was the Irish Independent. It would be you'd have to submit poems, fiction, and once a month they would choose like a short story, a few poems, and and at the end of the year they'd make a short list of that, and then they would award the prize on the basis of that. When I heard about it, I didn't think of the award.
Right.
I just thought, it would be good to have poems in a national newspaper.
Yeah, sure.
And that happened. I thought, oh, brilliant. And then I heard it was shortlisted. Went along on the night, and it was interesting, because you don't know in advance if you're the winner. And I was, having already written a crime novel, my one and only literary crime novel, I was looking at all the clues going, I definitely have not won. So and did win. The thing, it didn't massively change my life, but in Ireland, because I think there was a respect for it, and there's respect for writing, a really nice thing was, was in the local paper and the national papers, that the postwoman knocked on the door. She didn't have a parcel, it was just to congratulate me, and she's going, this is great for Leitrim, this is great for the local area, So that was nice. I don't know, would that happen here?
But I was thinking about your identity as a writer then. But when you win such an award, do people then go, David Cameron is a poet? And then, even though you're publishing novels, they've got you typeset as well, you find his work in the poetry section or something like that. Do you find that?
I don't know if I do, but I don't mind that, because I think of myself as a poet. I would say a poet novelist, but always with the poet first. That's what I was first of all, and still am, and I've got a few more ideas, concepts, things I've written the first 2 or 3 chapters of, and now I have to decide what the next novel is. So I'm not exclusively a poet, but and I don't mind if people think of me in that sense. And I even got my website address is davidcameronpoet.com, so I have signed up for that myself, I guess.
But it made me think, say Femke, wins the Booker or something like that, that turns on its head, because people then go, a novelist, David Cameron, but of course you would take it.
Well, that's the thing. You don't know, do you? I've got other ideas, like things like maybe I've written for children that that I think, well, I haven't looked for a publisher for that, but let's say I find a publisher and it's a great success, then that's what I'll be known for.
I guess it's great to have success anyway, and if you get it across all your things. But one of the reasons I was thinking about identity, as you say, you live and work now in Ireland, but you know, originally from Scotland. You've got this poetry and novel. Does that kind of dual identity feed into your writing, do you think? Do you ever write a novel?
You never tell me what the questions are going to be, and you ask interesting questions.
That's the best answer.
Yeah, dual identity. I guess it is. I mean, when I left Scotland, so that was in 2000. My first book, Russo Moon, had just been published in October, and it was, I don't know if you remember, 11/9. So that was before 9/11.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, it was the date the Scottish referendum was the imprint of Neil Wilson Publishing. They'd got a lot of lottery money, and they had launched like 6 authors at the same time. Linda Cracknell was one. I know you've had a show with her.
Yeah.
When I left, like my book was in the window at Waterson's. We just done like a mini tour of the Highlands. The Herald would be asking me, "What's your top 5 books?" And I felt like this is what it's always going to be like. Yeah. But when I went away to Amsterdam, it was like a lot of things as well. Like, let's say, getting funding to do things or being paid to do readings. Once you're out of the country, you don't get that. You're not entitled to it. I think maybe some funder said, "Well, we'll fund you once to come over from Amsterdam, but that'll be it."
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, and then there was 14 years, I said, until the next book. So the identity thing, I felt like, oh yeah, I've made it as a writer now, and then it was like, oh, I'm out in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like Liz Lockhead was very supportive when my book, first collection of poems, A Bright Tethers, came out, and we did a reading together in the Poetry Club in Glasgow.
Yeah.
But she was saying to me, you're totally under the radar here. And I mean, I don't know what how to rectify that, in the sense of, like, I'm not really into networking. I'm not really into. I will do some self-promotion, but when I see writers who promote themselves all the time, I'm put off. So I don't want to be that kind of writer.
Yeah, it's a fine balance.
So you just have to see how it goes, and if you get more and more readers, I certainly feel that when I make that contact with people, when writers say, like, it was Liz Lockhead's hairdresser,
right,
gave her a copy of my book, so when that happens and they actually respond really positively, like, okay, I'm doing something right, so I just need to keep doing it.
How did Liz's hairdresser find out about you?
Liz's hairdresser is friendly with my brother Stephen.
Right.
Again, my brother Stephen's connection again. So yeah.
And I think it's because often the most interesting writers are difficult to easily categorise. I think that's fair to say. And I would say that about your novels, at least the ones that I've read, is that they're literary novels. Well, kind of parts of mystery, isn't it? There's a kind of literary mystery, if you like. But that makes that kind of difficulty in categorising them is actually part of the thing that makes them so interesting to read.
Yeah, I think I was in my real influences were what I was reading in my teens, fiction, because I was reading the existentialists. I was reading Camus. I was reading Kafka, Dostoevsky, and the one question I'd worry about you asking would be if you say, well, who are the contemporary writers? I know some contemporary writers, but I find that those influences are the ones that persisted, and I'm interested in contemporary writing and other writers, but nothing influences me now the way it did at that impressionable age. Yeah. And I'm glad I found, I think, the right writers. So you're talking about like a mystery, a journey or whatever. That's because I am actually trying to find out the answer to some existential question, something that's really bothering me, that I feel like I need to get to the answer to this if I'm going to be able to live properly. So and I don't know, maybe that's gone out of fashion too, that existentialism and as a existentialist novels, but yeah, and I became like with Prendergast's Fall. This sounds implausible, right? But I would say that you couldn't read Prendergast's Fall without thinking this is influenced by Beckett.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. When you said you'd written on Beckett, it suddenly went, right.
Yeah, but the style for Prendergast's Fall came to me when I was about 14 or 15. I remember walking towards my girlfriend's house in East Kilbride, and it came to me in a flash, and that is the style of it. But obviously after that I read Beckett.
Mm-hmm.
If I was to revise Prendergast's Fall, I think I would go through it with a fine-tooth comb and take out anything that a sentence that sounds Beckettian or something. But certainly when I came across Beckett's How It Is,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw that arranged in like paragraphs,
Yeah.
and there was no punctuation. There is punctuation in Prendergast's Fall, but there was no punctuation. I thought, yeah, that's the kind of vision I had too. So influences, yeah, but I think it was coming from my life as well.
We could do a whole other podcast on the existential writers sometime. I think that would be a great conversation. Or maybe just you and I are talking the pub about it. What's next for you? Before we get a short reading from Femke, what's next? What's coming up?
Well, I'm for the past few years, since just before the pandemic, I've been working with a Toronto-based composer called David Yeager,
Right.
who a friend of mine, the poet Sean Haldane, who died recently, gave him a copy of my poems, and he really liked them. So I've been working with him, and that's interesting because, and I say all poems are involuntary, but sometimes you go, well, I'd like maybe some new poems on such, or he wouldn't suggest a theme, but I would maybe come up with a theme, and I go, well, I can't promise anything because I don't know, but I will always choose something that I have really strong associations with, then I'll dwell on it. So I've been there's a lot happening with him in terms of their performances in Canada, I think in the States maybe, in Belfast we've had performances. So he's setting things for voice, for various instruments. That's ongoing. We've done one there. It was T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and I was intrigued by like the women characters, 6 women characters in The Wasteland, where you just maybe get fragments of them speaking, and I wanted to elaborate on that. So for instance, there's one like a typist who the seduction of the typist in The Wasteland. I felt that although I love Eliot, especially Eliot, it was a bit snooty. It was a bit looking down at the working class typist who is sexually active, and and he quotes this, when lovely woman stoops to folly, which is a Goldsmith line about, if a woman loses her honour, she really has to kill herself, she has to die, and so that was a bit extreme. And I thought, well, if she had to speak, what would she say? So that was, I was trying to, I suppose, speak as a woman there again, but and it was sort of like I take my pleasure like a man because I can, at the end. That she was maybe freer than some of his more aristocratic ideals, I guess. So that's ongoing. In terms of writing, I have a new book of poetry called Red Dress coming out from Greenwich Exchange, which published my Beckett book, and the Ghost of Alice Fields. So that's coming out in November. Actually, so I'm just currently going through the typesetting. Well, I'm not doing typesetting. I'm just looking at the proofs. That includes the poems I was talking about about Eliot. With David Yeager. It's probably my most personal, nakedly autobiographical collection of poems to date. So there's that, and actually I think I have another 20 for the next book of poems. I've been incredibly prolific by my own standards, I think, since I moved to Ireland.
All right, okay. And this one that's coming out in November, that's at the publishers and pretty much ready to go. It's ready to go.
I've been checking the proofs, fighting my battle. Not really a battle but I won for the cover image. So yeah, that's ready to go, and I'll be promoting that. So in fact, it's come so hard on the heels of Femke that some of the launches I was thinking of doing for Femke. I'm going to do 2 books together.
Yeah, I think that would be perfect for you. You've got the poetry, you've got the fiction, and bring them together for people.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, there is actually, I should say that in Femke there is a sequence of poems that Michiel de Koning's poems do appear at the end. I don't really like poetry in fiction.
Right.
You know, I always skip over it myself. So I've done I followed them. You know, the example of Dr. Zhivago, where there's a Zhivago's poems are just in a separate section at the end. If you're interested in it, you can read it. If not, you don't have to, and it doesn't affect the plot or your understanding of the novel.
And before we finish up, could I get you to read maybe a little bit from Femke?
Sure. Yeah. This is genuinely a little bit. I was discussing this there was a launch of Gillian Sheriff's new novel Brodie the other day, and discussing with Ewan Morrison the difficulties at launches or public readings of fiction.
Yeah.
It's very, very easy to when you're listening to lose the thread sometimes.
Yes,
so,
that is true.
and I've always found that I've enjoyed poetry reading more. So I'm only going to read something very short and a little bit staccato, like maybe like some lyric poetry. Femke has been actually trying to track down this mysterious character M, or Madeline, that was Michiel de Koning's sort of true love, and she thinks she's got somewhere. She thinks she may have cracked it. But her discovery has shaken her. The thing is not to be broken and not to go mad. On the Amsterdam train, I kept thinking about his insult. I was nobody's fool, nobody's muse. So she was really real. They had fled one night, one blazing night, catching the ferry over the dark waves to England. Something happened there to make him desolate. But they had come back, both. After our exile, our return. Where was she now? Was she now? The most captivating woman he'd ever seen. He didn't say beautiful. Here were the fields and daylight, the neat geometry of it all, of a land that should be submerged by the sea, the dark waves of the sea. I am lost and alone.
Thank you very much. That was great. And thank you, David, for taking the time to have a chat with me today.
Thanks, Alan.